data link layer, network layer, transport layer, session layer, presentation layer, and the application layer. All of this is going to occur after it leaves your application and what happens to it from that point. When you hit enter and it takes it from your browser, here's where it's going to go. It's going to go from the application to the presentation and so on down to the physical. At the other end, when it gets sent across, it's going to actually go back up through the same set to the top. And then hand it off to whatever the application is that it was being sent to there, and then it sends it back, the information to you, all the way down, across, and back up. That's what it essentially does. Now, effectively, along the way, that you can think about it as a layer talks to its layer on the other end, essentially, but it doesn't literally. Okay, it's going to be figuratively that layers talk to layers. Sometimes you will see on illustrations that they'll have dotted lines across when they show an illustration like that between the layers. Because the application layer actually only talks to the presentation layer or to itself on the other end. Because what's going to happen is we're going to change the data as we send it down. We're going to actually tear it apart and encapsulate it. And at the other end is going to take it back up. And what the layer on the other end sees is the same thing that the layer on this end had passed down. It should look exactly the same when it's passed back up at that end. Now follow on that. So that when presentation passes it to session, when it gets back to here and session passes it to presentation on this end, what gets passed by session to presentation should look identical to the information that's passed from presentation to session.
So it's going to go from application to physical, and then from physical to application. And
So
then
it's going to go all the way down from application down to physical, across the wire. And I'm using wire in a wide sense there. And then it's going to pass from physical back up to application. And at that point, it passes it off to the actual application. Okay? What is the actual program that it's trying to get information to? Now, let's look at each of the layers briefly. We're not trying to learn everything about all 7 layers today. That's what the book is all about. Okay? Basically, you have about 1 chapter in the book on most of these layers. In some cases, you've got 2 chapters. Layer 3 is going to be chapters 6 and 7 in the current textbook. Okay? That one's got a lot of information. Top couple of layers we're not going to spend much time on actually in the course. And whenever you read stuff on OSI model, you're not going to see much information on the top 3 layers. It's the bottom 4 layers is where everybody gets concerned most with. And that you're going to know the bottom 4 ones backwards and forwards by December the 16th. In 9 weeks. Okay? But you need to learn the order these are in, and then what essentially happens on each layer. That's all we want to get right here. It's just an idea of why is the layer there, and just briefly, what's it doing? Without, and it may not make total sense to you on what an individual layer, you may have a layer there that you're really not sure on when we get through today, but you should have some idea of what the overall and what most of the layers are doing. Okay? Application layer, all it does is it works specifically with the application. But the application is not on the application layer. That can be confusing. So your browser is not on the application layer, but your browser hands off to the application layer, and the application layer hands the data, has the data ready completely in the format that the application needs, and hands it back to the application on the other end. Everybody follow on that? So that's not the application itself, that's just working with the application. And so your browser will talk back and forth with it right there. And that's involved on the application layer. The presentation layer works with presenting the data in a format that the application is going to be looking for the data. It's worried about getting it in the way that it needs to be presented to the application. So how is the application actually looking for this data? Or when it gets it, how's it going to present it to the network? But we're going to do a whole bunch more stuff with it when we take it from it. But it's concerned with just how's it presented to the application. The session layer, the job of that layer is to make sure the stuff is going back and forth and to establish communications with the other end and make sure that things are happening back and forth between the two ends in terms of the session. So it's going to manage your session that you're sending this stuff across between the two ends. Its job is to make sure that you get the initial connection there, and then that it watches it to make sure the stuff really does go back and forth. That's the session layer's job. Another way to look at the session is sort of like a secretary. If you've got an executive in a company that wants to call an executive in the other company, how does this executive do their telephone call? Do they pick up the phone and call the president of the other company? What do? They tell their secretary to call, to set up the call with the executive of the other company, so the secretary calls the secretary. The two secretaries start talking, and then they pass it off to their bosses. They've established the session. Okay? So they're doing the session layer in your normal world thinking there. Easy to remember also, to help you remember on that, is the fact that it's like the secretaries, because guess what? They both start with an S. Okay?
So session is make sure that A and B get together.
That they're getting together and that they continue to talk, because it's their job to keep it together. And then it's their job actually to break the call off, the conversation off at the end. Which if you think about two presidents talking back and forth to each other, that's usually what happens there too. Is they finish their conversation and they're very well likely to pass it back to the secretary for the secretary to put the appointment or whatever they need onto their appointment books at both ends of whatever they were going to get together or whatever to then do the follow-up to the telephone call. So think about high-level executives and their secretaries on that one. Probably most of us in here aren't going to ever have that niceness on that one. Have a secretary to handle all of that for us. That we have to play secretary also and pick up the phone and call the other person and write it in our appointment book or whatever also. But if we manage to get one of those $5 million a year jobs, $78 million a year jobs, then we get to have somebody else do our work for us. But since we don't make all that money, we have to do the work. Haven't ever figured that one out either. If you get paid the big money, then you ought to be able to do it all instead of hardly be able to do anything.
Well, you get paid good money, you have everybody else do it.
That's what it looks like it is. All right, transport layer. When we get to the transport layer, we actually start doing stuff to the data, which is what we're going to do from here on down. On the transport layer, we're going to break our data up into usable segments. So we're going to have segments on this layer. You're limited as you go across the network, and this